My name is Jacqueline Walker. I am 32 years old, and my sister turned my life into a spectacle over one signature she never got. By the time the glass of red wine hit my face, the music had already stopped. 300 people stood there in a vineyard ballroom, watching purple stains run down my hair and dress, while my sister shook with rage in front of me. I could hear her breathing harder than the band's speakers, see phones lifting, see my parents frozen near the head table. All of it because I refused to sign away the only place that has ever really belonged to me, a small beachfront house she decided was hers by default. She picked the biggest moment of her life to punish me for saying no, and she wanted an audience for it. She didn't slap me or scream quietly in a corner. She stepped into the center of the room, lifted her glass like a toast, then threw the wine straight into my face and hissed, "For someone who doesn't know their place." For a few seconds, nobody moved. Nobody even blinked. I just stood there dripping, trying not to flinch, knowing this was exactly the scene she had been building toward for weeks. Then, from table 3, a chair scraped back hard enough to cut through the silence. A man in a dark suit stood up, pointed toward us, and said something that made my sister's face drain completely of color. Before I tell you what he said, and what happened after I walked out, tell me, what time is it for you right now? And where are you watching from? I'm curious to see how far this story will travel. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, the pressure did not start with shouting. It started with little comments that sounded like favors. The beachfront house came up over coffee at my parents' kitchen table, the way it always does when my family runs out of neutral topics. It is a small place on a quiet stretch of sand, nothing glamorous by real estate standards, but it is the only thing in my name. I took over the mortgage after my godmother passed away and left it to me, and for years I have paid every bill and fixed every leak myself. It is where I go when everything else feels loud. My older sister, Courtney Walker, never liked that. She was born seeing every square foot of property as something that could be leveraged or upgraded. She works in luxury event planning now, which means she is paid to turn other people's spaces into spectacles. In her head, my house was never a home so much as a future brand. Photos, rentals, content. When she got engaged, her eyes landed on it the way they used to land on my clothes or my grades when we were teenagers. We have always moved through life at different speeds. Courtney rushed into everything, every club, every trend, every new way to look successful. I stayed in the background, finished my work, saved what I could. When my godmother left the house to me, Courtney called it a lucky break and joked that at least one of us would have something nice to show on social media. Underneath the joke was a question that never had to be asked out loud. How long until she got a share of it? The first push did not sound like a demand. It came wrapped in a compliment about how perfect the house would look with her wedding photos, how the light there at sunset would make her dress glow. She spoke as if the place had already volunteered. My mother, Diane, smiled along, picturing framed pictures and holiday cards. My father, Frank, stirred his coffee and stayed quiet, which in my family is its own kind of endorsement. Later, the language shifted. In the family group chat, Courtney began calling the house our little coastal backdrop and referring to it as the perfect gift to mark the start of her marriage. She did not use the word transfer. She used words like gesture and legacy. My mother sent hearts on those messages, as if they were sweet instead of strategic. My phone lit up with plans I had never agreed to. I listened while they talked about angles and guest rooms and how special it would be to start Courtney's new chapter there. None of them asked what that would mean for the only piece of stability I have managed to protect. They talked over one another with plans that did not include my voice, as if the house were sitting in the middle of the table instead of me. When I finally said I was not comfortable promising anything, the room cooled a few degrees. Courtney's smile did not disappear. It just tightened at the corners. My mother's shoulders dropped the way they do when she thinks I am being difficult. My father changed the subject to work traffic, the safest conversation he knows. No one said I was selfish out loud, but I could feel the word hanging there. In the days after that conversation, the story started spreading in smaller, more polished versions. A cousin texted to say how incredible it was that I was considering such a big gesture. An aunt messaged me a photo of the house and wrote that it would make the perfect beginning. I realized they were hearing a version where my decision was made. After that, every mention of the house carried a new weight. It stopped being a place where I spent quiet weekends and became a question mark they dangled over my head. Was I supportive enough? Grateful enough? Generous enough to hand over a title just to keep the evening calm? Courtney started slipping phrases like "when we use the house" into her planning messages, as if the decision were settled and I was the one lagging behind. My mother began reminding me how hard Courtney had worked for this wedding and how nice it would be not to make things harder. I kept repeating calmly that I was not signing anything and not committing the house to anyone's plans. Saying it out loud did not make me feel stronger, only more outnumbered. Every time I tried to draw a line, the conversation shifted into guilt instead of respect. By the time the invitations were printed, it was clear to everyone but me that my answer had been translated into an eventual yes, she just had not admitted yet. The first time the papers showed up, they did not come in a thick envelope from a law firm. They came in a cream folder with a gold ribbon tucked into a gift bag that could have held candles instead of legal language. Courtney handed it to me at the end of a Sunday brunch in front of our parents. She called it wedding logistics. Inside, nothing looked threatening. The first pages were timelines and vendor checklists, a seating chart template, harmless planning details. Buried near the back, printed on heavier paper, was a short agreement written in language that sounded soft until you read it twice. It framed my beachfront house as a shared family asset and described my intention to add Courtney and her future husband to the title for estate peace of mind. The signature line had my name already typed out underneath a blank space. There was a sticky note on top with a heart drawn in the corner and a time and date written neatly. A notary appointment Courtney had already booked at a coffee shop near her office. She had written that it was, "so we don't have to stress about it later," as if she were saving me effort instead of removing my choice. My mother flipped through the folder over my shoulder, nodding at the timelines. She did not pause on the transfer language. She treated it as one more box on a long list. My father stayed at the other end of the table, talking about highway construction with my uncle, leaving me to find the important part of the folder alone. I read the paragraph 3 times while Courtney chatted about centerpiece ideas. The more I looked at it, the less it felt like a form and the more it felt like a script. The wording did not ask. It recorded. It spoke as if my decision had already been made, and all that was left was to sign and let a stranger stamp it. I closed the folder and set it on the table. Courtney glanced over, her eyes flicking to my hands, and for the first time I saw something sharp behind her smile. She did not push, not right then. She just tapped the note with her finger and mentioned that the notary was in demand, as if missing that appointment would be inconvenient for everyone. I did not argue in front of her. I took the folder home, scanned the pages into my laptop, and read every line again under better light. The more distance I had from her voice, the clearer it became. This was not about easing paperwork if something happened to me. This was about securing a claim while she still had the family's full attention. 2 days before the notary appointment, I sent Courtney a short message. I told her I would not be signing any document that touched the title to the house, not before the wedding and not at a coffee shop. I said if she wanted to talk about future arrangements, we could do that with an independent advisor present, not a stranger she had picked. I kept it direct, with no apology added at the end. Her reply was a single line about being disappointed but not surprised. After that, I noticed small shifts, The digital invitation system for the wedding updated, and my name slid from the suggested family table near the head of the room to a miscellaneous table near the back. The +1 field next to my name vanished. When I asked my mother, she said it was because numbers were tight. But I knew how many of Courtney's friends had been added at the last minute. Relatives began sending me messages that assumed a different reality. One cousin thanked me for being so generous with the house. Another commented that starting Courtney's marriage in our shared place was such a meaningful step. I had not used those phrases, someone else had. Each text made it clearer that Courtney had begun rehearsing a version of the story where my refusal was just a phase. An aunt I trusted called one evening and lowered her voice as soon as I picked up. She had been at a dress fitting where Courtney described plans for our coastal spot in detail. There had been talk about repainting, changing the furniture, booking photographers out there for styled shoots. It was presented like a done deal, something inspiring rather than invasive. By then, it did not feel like a misunderstanding. It felt like a campaign. My no kept getting translated into a temporary obstacle instead of an answer. I started saving screenshots, noting dates, and keeping a private folder of everything that turned my house into someone else's backdrop. On the day of the wedding, Napa looked exactly like the brochure my sister had probably studied for months. The vineyard stretched in soft rows behind the stone terrace. The reception hall glowed with warm lights, and every surface seemed designed to show up well in photos. Guests arrived in a steady line, and staff moved between tables, adjusting details that already looked perfect. It felt less like a family event and more like a staged production, one where I had never seen the script. My place in that production was obvious as soon as I checked in at the welcome table. The planner's assistant pointed me toward a table near the back of the room, close to the doors where servers would be moving in and out all night. My name sat on a card next to distant relatives and acquaintances, people who knew my face but not my life. Up front, nearest the head table, I could see the cluster of cousins and close friends at the center of the room. Courtney and her fiancé, Logan, made their entrance with practiced ease. They moved through the room like they belonged on a magazine cover, stopping just long enough at each cluster of guests to smile and accept compliments. When Courtney's eyes passed over me, there was no irritation, no trace of the argument about the house. There was something cooler than that, a kind of polite dismissal that said she had already placed me where she wanted me. I spent most of the cocktail hour observing rather than participating, catching fragments of conversations about vendors, travel plans, and honeymoon flights. No one mentioned the beachfront house, but I saw the way certain family members glanced at me and then looked away, as if they knew more than I had agreed to. My mother floated between tables with a fixed smile. When she reached mine, she adjusted the cutlery and asked if everything was all right without quite meeting my eyes. My father took his seat only when the first course was being served, loosening his tie and complimenting the food. Neither of them brought up the messages, the folder, or the notary appointment that never happened. Their silence sat heavier than any confrontation could have. Speeches began after dinner. Friends of Logan told stories that painted him as loyal and steady. One of Courtney's bridesmaids described her as the backbone of every group she had ever joined. When my mother took the microphone, she talked about how proud she was of her oldest daughter and how Courtney had always taken on responsibility. Somewhere in the middle of it, she referenced the way family steps up for milestones, and several heads turned in my direction without meaning to. From my table near the back, I felt the distance more than the sound. When the toasts ended and the band started playing, guests moved to the dance floor while I stayed seated for a while, focusing on my breathing, counting each inhale to keep from overthinking. Eventually, curiosity pulled me closer to the center of the room. I did not want to dance, but I did not want to hide either. I stood near one of the tall windows overlooking the vines, where I could see both the party and the dark rows outside. From that angle, I noticed how carefully the evening had been arranged, the timing of speeches and the little cues that moved people from one moment to the next. It reminded me of the folder labeled logistics and how the most important part of that package had been hidden near the back. Courtney found me there between songs. She appeared at my elbow as if the night had finally reached a section where my presence mattered. Her dress was flawless, her hair pinned, her makeup still intact. Up close, though, I could see the same tightness at the corners of her mouth that I had noticed when I first refused to sign anything. Without raising her voice, she suggested that we move closer to the center, that it would mean a lot if I stood beside her for a moment. The tone was pleasant enough that stepping away would have looked like rudeness, so I followed, letting her guide me toward the open space between the head table and the dance floor, the spot where everyone's attention naturally returned. Guests began to notice us as we stopped. Conversations thinned, then paused. A server carrying a tray of drinks changed direction to avoid walking through the gap that had formed. Courtney's hand left my arm and found a fresh glass of wine from a nearby table with a practiced motion, as if this, too, had been rehearsed. Standing there under the lights, surrounded by her carefully arranged crowd, I realized that whatever she planned to do next was not spontaneous. It was another line in a script she had written without my input. One more scene in a story where the house and I both belonged to her version of family. The instant after the wine left, my sister's hand felt less like drama and more like something breaking cleanly in two. Sound vanished. The band cut off mid-note. Forks hovered in mid-air, and for a second the only thing moving in that hall was red liquid sliding down my face and neck. My dress clung to me, my skin burned, and my sister stood a few feet away breathing hard, satisfied in a way that said this was not an accident, but a choice she had been building toward. I did not cling to her exact sentence, only to the message under it. I needed to be put back in line, and this was how she wanted to do it. A chair scraped from the front of the room. At table 3, a man in a dark suit stood up with the kind of steady posture that pulls attention without effort. I had noticed him earlier as one of the guests who looked more like a work contact than a cousin. Now he stepped into the open space between the tables and the dance floor, positioning himself where he could see us and be seen in return. When he spoke, his voice was even and clear. He said he had listened all evening to talk about a particular beachfront house and to comments about a big gesture tied to that property. He pointed out that he had just watched one sister corner the other in front of a crowd and then dump a drink on her when she did not get the agreement she wanted. He called that kind of pressure and public humiliation a serious problem if anyone ever tried to use it as proof that an agreement had been made. Then he turned to me. He asked if I had signed anything that transferred any interest in my house. My throat felt tight, but I managed to say I had not signed a single page. He nodded once, as if confirming a fact he expected, and only then introduced himself as an attorney who works with real estate and estates. In the same calm tone, he added that any document drafted on the assumption that I had already promised the property would look very bad if it ever landed in front of someone like him. On the other side of the room, the staff were already moving. Aaron Dalton, the vineyard's operations manager, approached with a kind of contained calm that told me nights like this were not new to her. She identified herself, kept her hands to herself, and stated that the interaction had been captured on the venue's security cameras. She said an incident report would be created as part of their standard procedure and that any formal questions about what had happened should go through her office. Those two simple statements did more than any apology could have. Up until that moment, Courtney had kept the story of my house inside spaces she could shape: family texts, brunch tables, wedding spreadsheets. Now there were people in the room who did not share our last name, people whose job was to record, not to protect anyone's feelings. I watched my sister's shoulders stiffen, her jaw tighten, Her gaze flicked toward the nearest exit before snapping back. The guests started moving again, but the night did not recover its shine. Conversations turned into short, strained whispers. A few people stared down at their plates with the kind of focus you only see when someone is pretending not to notice something. The band eased into a slow song with the volume turned down, background noise laid over a fracture that everyone could still feel. My mother reached me first with a linen napkin and a fixed smile. She began blotting at my face and dress as if cleaning the stain might rewind the last minute. Under her breath, she asked why I had not stepped aside, why I had to make things harder, why I could not just let Courtney have this moment without pushing back. None of those questions touched the hand that had thrown the wine. My father hovered just behind her, suggesting water, fresh air, a quick stop in the restroom so I could pull myself together and come back out like nothing happened. His tone sounded like he was smoothing over an irritated client, more worried about restoring the flow of the event than about what it had cost. I stood still and let them fuss because arguing there would only feed more eyes. Under the napkin, my skin stung, but my thoughts were sharper than they had been in weeks. Alongside the embarrassment, something colder settled in. A list of what had just happened. In order. In front of witnesses who understood how serious it was. When my mother paused to smooth a strand of hair away from my cheek, I told them I was leaving the venue, not stepping outside for a few minutes, not hiding in a side room, leaving. I did not pad it with apologies, did not offer to stay through the next scheduled moment. I said I was done and started walking toward the doors. They followed for a few steps, asking me to reconsider, to stay at least until the cake, at least until the photographer finished. Their urgency belonged to the timeline taped to the back of the planner's clipboard, not to me. I kept moving. As I crossed the room, conversations dipped and rose behind me. A few relatives started to say my name, then stopped when they realized I was not turning around. Near the exit, Aaron met my eyes and gave a small professional nod, the kind that promises a report written exactly as it should be. The attorney from Table 3 sat back down with his phone in hand, already turning the evening into notes. Outside, the air above the vines was cooler and cleaner, carrying only a faint echo of music. My dress was heavy, my hair smelled like wine, but my mind felt oddly steady. I unlocked my car, sat behind the wheel, and began arranging the night in my head as a sequence of facts I would not allow anyone to rewrite later. The next morning, the fallout started quietly. A long text from Courtney sat at the top of my screen, cheerful and polished. She wrote that the night had been emotional, that we should move on, and that she and Logan were planning to escape to the beach place for a few days to unwind and film some content. She suggested I could leave the keys with our parents so they would not have to bother me with details. There was no apology, no reference to the wine, no mention of the man who had stood up in the middle of the reception. The message treated the house as reserved and me as a minor detail. I did not answer. Instead, I opened the photo of the business card he had left on my table. The name above the downtown address read, Gregory Hale. When I called, he remembered me before I finished explaining. He said he had seen enough to know that things around the house could get worse if no one set clear lines. He asked me to forward every message mentioning the property and invited me to bring my documents that afternoon. Before hanging up, he told me not to sign, promise, or casually agree to anything involving the address. My next call was to the vineyard. The front desk put me through to Erin Dalton, the operations manager. She confirmed that the incident on the dance floor had been logged and that the footage from that section of the night was stored with the rest of the security recordings. If anyone requested it formally, she said, it would be produced according to policy. Nothing in her tone suggested that a favor or a phone call could make it disappear. After I showered and sealed my dress in a garment bag, I drove to the beachfront house. The road was familiar, but I saw the place differently now that I knew how easily someone I loved could try to redesign it in her head. I walked through the rooms, checked the locks, and pulled the fireproof box from the closet. Inside were the pages I needed: the deed listing me as the owner, mortgage statements, property tax receipts, the letter from my godmother's attorney. I stacked them in order on the kitchen table until the surface looked like a file instead of a home. Gregory Hale's office sat in a low building a few blocks from the courthouse. I spread my documents in his conference room and walked him through the last few months. The hints about a big gesture, the cream folder dressed up as wedding planning, the notary appointment already scheduled, the seating change that pushed me to the back, the cousin messages that assumed I had agreed, the scene in the ballroom, the text asking for keys. He listened without interrupting, pausing only to note dates. When I finished, he arranged the pages into a rough timeline. In his view, Courtney was building a story where everyone acted as though the house belonged to her, so that later a document would seem to match what people already believed. The public pressure at the reception fit the same pattern. Then he outlined what we would do. First, he would file a notice with the county recorder flagging the title so that any new document touching the property would trigger extra review. Second, he drafted a letter for me to sign instructing the homeowners association and utility providers that no changes or applications tied to the address were valid without my written consent. Third, he prepared a formal notice to Courtney and Logan, warning that any further attempt to present the house as theirs in planning, advertising, or agreements would be treated as a serious legal issue. I initialed and signed where he marked, my name appearing over and over in ink instead of in someone else's assumptions. It felt mechanical and strangely steady. For the first time, my position existed somewhere other than in family conversations that could be edited later. Over the next week, the system did what it was designed to do. I started receiving copies of emails and letters addressed to me. A utility company reported that a request had been made to change the account holder but could not be processed without proof that matched county records. An office that handled short-term rental registrations sent a notice saying an application for my property was incomplete without documentation showing the applicant actually owned it. Each message documented another attempt by someone else to step into a role they did not have. I forwarded everything to Gregory. He added each piece to his file, explaining that this was exactly why he had wanted those safeguards. Every time my sister tried to turn her version of events into something official, it bounced back in writing with my name on it instead of hers. At the house, I made smaller changes that did not require anyone's approval. I replaced the front door lock, added a deadbolt to the side entrance, installed a discreet camera over the porch, and set motion lights along the walkway. None of it felt dramatic. It felt like finally building the boundaries I had been asking everyone else to respect. Months after the wedding, the court stamps and certified letters were slowing down, but the consequences were only getting clearer. Gregory forwarded an email from a corporate client who had quietly dropped out of talks with Courtney's firm. They cited behavior at a private celebration and said they needed planners who could guarantee professionalism. A vineyard asked for updated insurance documents and clarification on who would actually be on site during events. No one used our last name, they just adjusted their plans. In that world, you do not get a second chance at calm once people have seen you weaponize a party. At home, my parents tried to drag everything back into something that looked like normal. My mother left bright voicemails about sitting down like adults, without lawyers. My father suggested we write a simple note about what would eventually happen with the house so everyone could move on. Hearing them, I finally accepted that they were not neutral witnesses to what had happened. They were more afraid of noise than of the way my sister had tried to rewrite my life. I answered once, in a short email. I said I was safe, that the title was protected, and that from now on anything involving the property would go through Gregory Hale. I added that I needed distance instead of another conversation built around treating months of pressure and one public humiliation as a misunderstanding. Then I stopped explaining. They were free to decide how to feel about that. I was done negotiating my reality. Courtney stayed quiet until the impact on her work refused to stay small. When she finally wrote, her message was long, careful, and empty where it mattered. She talked about stress and how hard she had worked, about feeling misunderstood and unfairly judged by strangers. She did not mention the wine, the documents, or the way she had told people the house was already hers. Near the end, she repeated that she still believed the beachfront place should eventually come back to the family, as if saying it softly made it reasonable. I forwarded her email to Gregory and archived it. He logged it, reminded me that nothing about our position had changed, and closed his note with a line I copied into my journal. They can want whatever they like. They cannot have it without your consent. The notice on the title stayed in place. The incident record at the vineyard stayed on their server. Attempts to register rentals or alter utilities without my signature kept failing. For once, the paper trail was working for me instead of against me. Outside that file, my world narrowed in ways that hurt and helped at the same time. Fewer invitations arrived for holidays. Group chats went quiet or slid into plans I was not part of. When cousins asked if I was just taking a break from big gatherings, I let them keep that version. Telling the full story to people who had only heard Courtney's edited one would not have made me safer. It would only have given them more material to debate. Inside the beach house, real life finally caught up to what the deed already said. I patched soft boards, repainted trim, and moved furniture until the rooms fit the way I actually live. I bought groceries for myself instead of stocking up for imaginary guests. I added simple things that made sense for me, like better light in the hallway and a new deadbolt on the side door. None of it was dramatic. It was quiet, repetitive proof that this place was not a prop, not a prize, just my home. Some evenings I sat on the porch and thought about how close I had come to handing all of this away. One signature would have kept the wedding smooth and my parents comfortable. It also would have taught everyone watching that my boundaries were optional, that they could take what grounded me as long as they wrapped it in the word family. Once you give up the one thing that makes you feel safe, people learn very quickly that they can keep asking. There was no final shouting match in a parking lot, no dramatic speech that tied everything up. Gregory eventually marked my case as resolved, with a note that he could reopen it if anything new appeared. The title stayed in my name. The locks stayed changed. From scattered comments, I heard that Courtney shifted towards smaller clients who did not ask many questions, and that Logan stopped talking about beach houses altogether. My parents kept hosting holidays. I chose not to attend. I did not slam every door behind me. I simply stopped leaving them wide open for people who had shown me exactly how they would use that access. Messages about the house went unanswered or were forwarded. Invitations that came with the expectation that I would be reasonable, no matter what had happened, stayed on the counter until the dates passed. When conversations drifted toward someday, when we are all together at the beach, I changed the subject instead of changing my boundaries. Living with that choice is not glamorous. It is heavy, and, some days, lonely. But every time I walk up those front steps, unlock a door only I have keys to, and make coffee in a kitchen I was pressured to give away, I remember why I drew the line. I did not destroy something healthy to keep four walls and a roof. I stopped letting a pattern of entitlement hide behind shared blood and the word sister. If this story gives you anything, I hope it is the reminder that boundaries are not cruelty. Protecting what you have earned or been trusted with does not make you ungrateful. Saying no when someone treats your life like a backdrop is not a failure of loyalty. Pay attention to what people feel entitled to. Write down what matters, and do not wait for a public humiliation to decide that your No is final. Thank you for staying with me to the very end. If it made you look at your own lines a little differently, I would genuinely like to hear what it brought up for you.